With inflation's grip on American wallets holding strong, and new numbers.
Welcome everyone to California Progressive Alliance's conversation that we're having in regards to the latest ban on homelessness and what we believe is an increased criminalization of the unhoused and of unhoused communities, those that are living without shelter on the streets of LA and LA County. Specifically, the latest ban that the Los Angeles City Council has approved is a ban of encampments within 500 feet of schools and daycares. It's essentially an addition to the anti-camping law that existed from earlier this year in June, in which the City Council, by way of several different organizations and usually they're business organizations and homeowners, neighborhood groups that said, you know, we want you to do something about the unhoused situation and the encampments that are propping up too close to schools and the daycares and the playgrounds. And thus the City Council thought that the best solution to this would be to increase the criminalization of a group that is possibly the most criminalized in the city. We're gonna speak with, we've got three amazing guests, one of which I know very well and two of which I've just learned about. So I wanna introduce them. I want to start with Michelle Manos, who is the chair of the CPA Steering Committee. She's an activist and community organizer based in LA, whose background is in logistics, organizational infrastructure, public policy, and coalition building. She's the co-founder of Solidarity Projects, a mutual aid and logistics organization, and Bernie's Coffee Shop in Los Angeles as well. And she's, as I mentioned, she's currently serving as the chair of California Progressive Alliance and our steering committee. Welcome, Michelle. I'd also like to introduce another panelist, NDINDI KITONGA, who's a Kenyan American educator and advocate for the unhoused. She created PUMA, Palm's Unhoused Mutual Aid Network, to respond to the unmet needs of the unhoused community during the COVID pandemic. She's also a co-founder of Angelus Workshop School in LA, which focuses on democratic learning and class consciousness, as well as serving on the faculty of the Longy School of Music at Bard College. Thank you, NDINDI. Welcome to the show. We'd also like to introduce Theo Henderson. He's the host of the We the Unhoused podcast. They cover live police sweeps, town halls, mutual aid events, and diverse community actions. He was recently named as activist in residence to UCLA's Luskin Institute on Inequality and Democracy. Welcome, Theo, to the program. Thank you all so much for being a part of this. I think the first question I have is, what is your reaction to this latest ban, which arose absolute outrage in so many community organizations and activist groups? I think one of the main coalitions, Services Not Sweeps Los Angeles, said it was just the last and final straw that broke the camel's back. This is really just an onslaught of criminalizing unhoused people. The people that are most in need of services, help, and support are going to be the ones to be criminalized. Let's start with you, NDINDI.
Yeah, thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. So, you know, as an educator, I think it was really fascinating that they used children as an excuse to pass this particular, to expand 4118, which is this idea that we want to further criminalize folks who are unhoused and unsheltered. So more places that you cannot sleep, lie down, store your property, what have you. And that was used for that is unfortunate. And part of the reason some of us went to City Hall, and part of the reason that that's extremely not just upsetting in the expansion of it in itself is this idea that you're trying to solve social questions and social failings and socioeconomic problems with criminalization across the board. So that's actually what we reject. The idea that if these ordinances don't help anyone to get housed, They increase criminalization. They make it so that as people are criminalized, we lose contact with them. Folks lose their communities. And there's no answer to the question that is houselessness through 4118. But I'll let Theo go ahead and talk more.
Thanks for that, NDINDI. Theo, what is your organization doing? What was your reaction to this, and what is your organization doing?
To give you a little bit of background information, I can speak intelligently on the experiences of being unhoused because I created We Unhoused while I literally lived in the park across the street from a school. And the weaponization of this is disastrous because there are families that have children that are displaced. In fact, there's over 51% of unhoused children in LAUSD. And that conversation is always obfuscated or not even discussed in mainstream media. Housed parents are always weaponizing their housed children, precious children, and forgetting, like one of the unhoused fathers that I interviewed, he says, what about my children? I love my kids too. Why is it that your children are prioritized? And then you're telling, for example, one of the parents told me that the police came in and told the students that if they see an unhoused person, to call the police. Now imagine that the children are relying on the adults and the educators and the principals and administrators to our guidance, and they're telling that while a child that sits next to them that's experiencing houselessness and criminalizing the parents and making them feel that their parents are evil and bad. That is where we are. That is the unspoken conversations that doesn't get taught. And where We Unhoused has done is create a platform that is counter mainstream media to communicate with the unhoused communities, how 4118 impacts them, in addition to why that their parents and their children do not get the same kind of platform when they're voting and doing all of the things that is necessary to speak out against this, there's no other way to say it, evil practice that some housed community members are espousing.
Thanks so much for that, Theo. Michelle, if you'd like to join the conversation about your reaction to this latest ban and what you or your organization might be doing in response.
Yeah, I think while you can't blame any one city or any one politician for homelessness in this country, I do think that Los Angeles continues to experience extraordinary political failure. You know, someone said to me the other day, someone who is well acquainted and, you know, has loved ones who have been unhoused, said, you know, but what about schools? Like, what about students walking to school? And I said, you know what, you might be able to make that argument if it wasn't the parks and the bus benches and all the other places people are not welcome to be unhoused. And so what we have is a shuffling around the city, and the spaces where people can exist are becoming smaller and smaller and less accessible and more dangerous. And so until we have a comprehensive solution about where people can go to be safe, then you cannot continue to create ordinances that outlaw here and there when it's really just someone trying to lay down, someone trying to put up a small shelter in order to be safe from the elements. And, you know, Theo's point that there is a Venn diagram overlap between unhoused people and children and families, right? And when I spent the majority of the height of the pandemic working for one of our city's mobile shower organizations. And, you know, we saw children, we saw families who had moved into their cars, who came to our showers with children. And, you know, as an out person, you don't always know what happens when you stop seeing people. And you have to just kind of hope that it was good news and not bad news why they stopped coming to see you at the showers, right? So, you know, it's so much more than one individual service, and it's so much more than one ordinance that outlaws one specific place. It's about the fact that there's not a comprehensive solution. And if you look at Mike Bonin and the way that he's posting about what's happening in his district on the west side, you know, he'll tell you, or I think it was last year, that the statistic was there are only enough beds in our city for 39% of our unhoused. So that's why you see a lot of the outreach workers marking people as, you know, refused services, right? Because in my opinion, they don't want to show a big gap between people who do want support getting housing and, you know, the housing or the beds that are available. So we have a massive political disconnect and a massive political failure, and it's happening in every city across the country, but I expect more of Los Angeles. We need to do something here.
Now, interestingly enough, Los Angeles passed Measure HHH a few years ago, which earmarked $1.2 billion towards homeless services, and specifically towards the creation and the construction of either permanent supportive housing or temporary shelters and temporary housing. Unfortunately, as just about every measure or every way you can gauge the effectiveness of this program was that it simply wasn't enough, that there's still not enough beds, there's not enough places to set up temporary shelters. They're, quite frankly, they weren't, or according to city officials and city agencies, they weren't equipped to deal with the huge number of unhoused people, which in the city is about 45,000, and in Los Angeles County is about 65,000. And these are just rough estimates. I actually, as a journalist, I took part in the Greater Homeless Services, the Greater Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority count, maybe about 6 or 7 years in a row. And I can tell you that we definitely undercounted and underrepresented what the actual picture was of unhoused people in the city of LA and in the county of Los Angeles as well. I think our next question is, you know, since there is so many, there was a bond measure, there's of course HHH, there's, it seems that the voters and the constituents of Los Angeles City and County are overwhelmingly in support of saying, hey, okay, let's fund more services. Let's go ahead and give the green light towards shelters. But it all seems to fall short. There doesn't seem to be enough, as I mentioned earlier, there's not enough housing, there's not enough shelters. It seems that we're putting a Band-Aid on a problem that was in the works for so many decades, and we can get into all of the specifics and all of the complexities of you know, veterans coming back from PTSD, LGBTQ youth being thrown out onto the streets, you know, the war on Black America and Black men. We can go on and on and on. You know, the housing crisis, the opioid epidemics. You know, like I mentioned, we can go on and on and on. We don't have the time, but what we do know is that from Pomona to Pacoima, from Long Beach to Lancaster, this is a crisis, perhaps the most horrific crisis of our time. And we now need to come up with solutions. And if we're not here to come up with solutions, we need to be able to come up with a way in which we discuss the humanity of unhoused people with our neighbors who are listening to Fox News, who are listening to the ABC Evening News, who are listening to some of the right-wing radio stations that are constantly telling them these people made the wrong choices. These people are mostly criminals. These people are of bad-minded people, and you know, you just got to let them deal with the consequences of their actions. And so, how do we get around? I mentioned at the top of the program that the people that are usually behind these bans, in this case, it was LA City Council member Nuri Martinez who mentioned, look, we understand that we need to address the unhoused situation, which we have. We know that we have to address the issue and the desperation of unhoused people, which we're doing. But in the immediacy of this new ban is that we have to give children and families the right of way to get to school. Now, I think Theo, and I'd like to start with Theo because he mentioned such an important point about a lot of these students and their families, a lot of the parents of these students are homeless themselves. So how do we let our city council members know? How do we let our local law enforcement agencies know? How do we let the Chamber of Commerces of all these different municipalities know that, look, there is a more humane solution and no one's proposed it, and there's just not enough work being done. People want the immediacy and the impatience of just criminalize them, lock them up, cite them, throw them in jail. Theo.
time doesn't permit to go into everything that you've stated, but I want to also point out, because there is a misnomer that this is the right wing and Republican doing it. We live in a democratic city, and most of the people that have voted against criminalizing unhoused people are not Republicans. These are Democrats. So let's disabuse that notion that these Republicans are running and spreading this misinformation campaign. Let's also discuss how mainstream media that is also supposed to be progressive as well has pushed off the same narrative. I said in the conference on the National Coalition of Homelessness that there is a bipartisan support in dehumanizing and criminalizing unhoused people. And if we have to look at it, examine the matter very closely, we can look at it by the budgets that we've approved. We have approved this Democratic progressive city has approved over 54% of the budget to police officers. Now, when we're dealing with house assist services, the police officers also take a lion's share from that money. So I submit to you that one of the things that we need to do is to understand and listen to what unhoused and activists has been saying that hasn't been heard by progressives, liberals, Republicans, right wings, and whoever side of the aisle that you scroll on, is to listen that housing, permitted social housing, services, not sweeps, handcuffs with housing and not handcuffs are the way to go. We have been saying this, 5 unhoused people die a day. And every time that with this conversation is broached, you hear the same disastrous talking points about the poor safety of unhoused people getting past minding their business, ignoring the fact that most of the violence that happens to unhoused people are from housed people, from calling the police on unhoused people. Having unhoused Black people have 2 out of 4 chances of a police interaction that ends in violence. And that tells you just how wrapped up that we are in the narrative that there is solution, but there are solutions, but we just don't want those solutions. We don't want to see poor people. And if we have to demonize them in order to criminalize them, then so be it.
Thank you, Theo. And NDINDI, next we go to you. What are some of the unhoused people that make up your network? What are they saying? What are some of the advocates saying? And what do you say to those that tell you, no, NDINDI, your heart's in the right place, but you know what? We've got to take drastic measures to move people off the streets.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think the drastic measures just come down to permanent housing that's not coercive, non-carceral, that has no conditions, is not means tested. The solution to houselessness is just a house. That's just what it is. All of these other types of things, housed people participate in. So in my particular organization, PUMA, we do quite a bit of harm reduction. So supporting people who use drugs, along with people who have all sorts of situations going on for them. And a big deal of that, the reason why people cannot get better, a reason why people participate in whatever they do is because they are unhoused. Like houselessness produces trauma, or like 40% of youth who are on the streets are LGBTQ because they've been rejected from their own homes, right? Most of the women, we have a reunification kind of home thing with my collective, where we try and get women who are ready to kind of go back home wherever they came from. We support them and do that. I think really the solutions really lie with the people who, the 60 to 70,000 folks in our county who are unhoused, who really bear the brunt of all the awfulness and the kind of violence that's going on here, and who don't get to participate in this so-called democracy, right? Because you don't have an ID, because like that's what houselessness is. You don't get to participate as a full human being in the society, which is kind of an awful thing. And so I think any solution where unhoused people are not the center of it or get to say anything about it, where they participate fully, is not going to be part of it. And I also think any kind of solution that is not just a house without conditions, because we come from the perspective where everyone and anyone should be housed regardless. I just don't see how that's a way forward. And it's a really type of interesting thing when we go to City Hall and we are the ones who are the dissidents and the wayward type of awful people, where we're like, the data is there to support this from the harm reduction perspective. The data is here to support this. There are other, countries and places where they're doing better and they've thought about these things. So everything that we're proposing is never pie in the sky. Criminalization is extremely expensive, and the cost being human life, and the cost also being like all of those monies that we talked about, and the fact that like the solution always lies in like, let's give LAPD more money to observe sweeps. Best case scenario is that they stand there. Worst case scenario is that they continue and brutalize and violate people. I don't think that we are unreasonable by suggesting that the monies could go elsewhere.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, NDINDI. I really appreciate your comments. Michelle, you mentioned that you worked with Showers of Hope, which set up these mobile shower units in residential areas where there's usually a large number of unhoused people that don't have access to clean showers. What can you say about, if the latest issue was about, hey, unhoused people just can't put their encampments next to a residential area, they can't put it next to a daycare or a school, which to me sounds like just about every residential area in LA County, right? What do you think a lot of the unhoused people have said about why they choose, let's say, a residential neighborhood to set up an encampment rather than an industrial area where they might be prone to more violence, where they're more vulnerable? What can you say about that?
There's so much to say about that. To what Theo said, we could do a full panel on each of these subtopics that we're trying to address right now. And perhaps we should. But, I'll say a couple things in response to that. Number one, this came to me like while you were speaking, but if you want to make reasonable assertions about where unhoused people should be able to build encampments and where they shouldn't, you need to think about not reducing the space that's available to them, right? So if you say, this is the space, right? Some city planner needs to say, well, 500 feet around every school and daycare is this many square feet throughout Los Angeles. And so this many square feet is going to be made available elsewhere. And it can't be in the desert. It's got to be in these places that are accessible, because people need to get on the bus. They need to go to the doctor. Many people who are unhoused need to go to work, right? We saw that a lot at the showers, where people would come and visit us regularly, or they would come and see us at different locations because they had to shower before work or school, right? Or after work or school, right? And then they were living in their car or truck or something like that. Or in some, there's so many different layered dynamics to the situations in which people find themselves, right? So maybe you sleep on your friend's couch, but that person's spouse has said, but that's where I draw the line. They can't be showering here and cooking. They need to be out at 6 a.m., right? Or whatever it may be. So people are scrambling and scrounging for all different ways to survive. And I think that, anybody who has ever come home from a stressful day and said, dang, I need a drink, needs to not be judging people who are, using substances in order to self-medicate, in order to get through this life that for some people is really terrible and is not a life that human beings should be living, right? And so when you tell people, well, you're not allowed here, you're not allowed there, you're too dirty for the store, you're too this, you're too that, we can't hire you like this, and oh, by the way, don't you dare be on drugs or you're never going to get help. I mean, it's really, you think about it like that, and to me, it's like wildly inappropriate to treat another human being that way. And the fact that we have set up our systems to treat people that way. And like Dindi said, we know from other countries that housing first works. So if you want people to be able to deal with the depression and anxiety that they're experiencing, the trauma and PTSD that they're experiencing, get them to a safe place first. I mean, how many people do you know that have been able to deal with their trauma while still being in the trauma? It's too much to ask, and it's not appropriate. And if you think about it from a molecular human level, most people are, you know, the people that have been able to sort of claw their way against all odds are, you know, not the norm, right? That's 1 in a million who got a break in some way, or was able to, you know, in some way stabilize their mental health. But when you have the compounding trauma happening all the time, you can't expect people to pull themselves out of it. There needs to be a stable environment in which people can pull themselves out of it and feel safe when they go to sleep at night, and they know where their next meal is coming, and then they can start to deal with these things that are keeping them from being able to be a full participant in their own lives.
Can I speak up on something? And I think it really needs to be driven home. Creatively, we keep talking about finding space for them to be. I'm going to say I need to push back on this, because there are families literally out on the street. Telling them where they can go 500 miles away from the schools is just not correct. There's a mother that has 3 children that have a very minimal Wi-Fi access, and all of them have homework. They're near the school because there's maybe greater frequency. They have a relationship with the school. They have access to, because they are children, they have access to the parks. They have access to all of the things. And I think us as a society, as we keep jumping away, telling where they can't be at the daycares and schools, is a violation of their civil rights. The second thing is, yesterday when I was servicing another mother with 2 infant children, this is the same kind of nonsense. This is the same kind of advocacy that pushed this family away from the schools, even though she has 2 infants living in an RV. This is harmful. We have got to stop creatively sidestepping and talk about they can't be. No, they have the right to be at schools. Just because you're unhoused and poor does not give you the right to make demands to create them as criminals. That should be in progressive, that should be in liberal, that should be Republican, that should be our byway station. And I don't give a damn if it's not going to be received well. We should start to be the change that we want to see happen. That should stop.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Theo. And I want to appreciate that correction. And you know, I was just thinking about the amount of space, but proximity matters. And you know, I've seen plenty of families and children living in these circumstances. You're absolutely right, and I appreciate you making the point. Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of you know, there are so many other discussions that can go into this topic and into what the city council has essentially pushed the narrative of, which is no, we're just trying to keep our children safe. We're trying to keep our school kids safe. And you know, just the mere thought of them pushing this narrative that unhoused people are dangerous, are just inherently a risk to kids, are just bad people, is something that I can't believe all of the media that I perused today never mentioned, never questioned, just reported on without asking. Are you saying that every homeless encampment is going to be a danger to kids, whereas many children live in some of these encampments? And as Theo mentioned earlier, a lot of their parents are homeless as well. There's a lot of families that are living unsheltered in cities, and who might live within 500 feet, might have you know, parked their station wagon, or might have a tent that's within city grounds, or rather school grounds. You know, moving on, is there a light at the end of this desperation tunnel? Is there what do we see as future solutions? And I know that all of you as individuals, as activists, as advocates, as people that work with different organizations that are doing the righteous work that a lot of state-funded agencies aren't, what do you see as the future of unhoused situations?
There has to be a tectonic shift in the way we address the houselessness situation, from language and to our understanding what houselessness is. Most people attribute housing with safety of children. And I always ask, what children are you talking about? Because now you're introducing class, because you're talking about housed children that you are caring about, because you don't care about the unhoused children. You don't care because most of the unhoused children are very poorly served at LASD in some respect in order understanding their issues. What you're arming those parents and those teachers with is that they are bad. And there was years ago, there was an experiment that where a Black child was to choose who was the most beautiful of the race, the white and Black. So I submit to you, if you guys or the mainstream media and society is continually to say being poor or being Black and brown and unhoused is bad, even among your community members from your media, from the stories, the songs, the adults, all of this, and they're looking at their parents and themselves as bad, what do you think the deleterious effect that that's going to have on them? Then when we're talking about solutions, we need to have a strong education campaign to educate that houselessness is a way of life. It is a way of life and a reality in America because we are under the guise or the weight of capitalism. The second thing we need to understand as well is that we're dealing with that. How are we going to be humane and also have a solution where unhoused people is not shamed or pejorative and among our lexicon from progressive, liberals, and you name it, whoever skips it down the aisle, these are the stories that we need to start. The solutions are there. We have to understand that houselessness is more than just encampments. It's cars. It's those seedy hotels that I used to have to stay in until 30 days, and you got to jump and stay outside for a bit or walk around a bit. It's for the families having to, because if they have to go to a trucking station, duck and dodge because some nosy NIMBY is going to call CPS on them to have the kids disrupted or taken from them. These are the realities that I never hear mainstream media talk about. I never hear in these conversations with NIMBYs that's explaining these issues. Whereas Weedy and Howe's podcast on all of this media platforms talks about these, we're the lived experience experts. This is one of the beginnings that we can do with the solutions, as well as become part of the NDINDI's mutual aid, Weedy and Howe's mutual aid. Families show up all the time. We don't talk about the increasing elderly population of unhoused people. You can't say that they're all criminals, 80, 90 years old with Alzheimer's. Or they just like to be out there shooting drugs. That's just not a reality. This is not going away. And everybody should be trained, housed and unhoused, and dealing with Narcan and harm reduction, because we have an opioid crisis in housed and unhoused people. That's it.
Thanks so much for that, Theo, and thank you for mentioning Narcan and all the different harm reduction that we can do to save people that are living unhoused in our streets, those that need that are in desperate straits for help, that due to opioid addictions and all the other substances that proliferate on the streets of LA. There's still human beings that require us to step in if they're in absolute desperation. I was watching a documentary recently on the fentanyl crisis and how fentanyl's crept up into every single street drug, whether it be heroin, whether it be crystal meth, even marijuana, and different types of blunts they're now adding fentanyl and tranquilizers, and it's absolutely a horrific situation. In DINDI, kind of continuing on that subject, how do we speak to, Theo mentioned, the whole NIMBYites who are really a big problem or a thorn in our side. They're the ones who are sometimes the most active. They'll show up to the city council members. They'll organize with their city of commerce. They'll organize with local business leaders to ensure that cops come by to sweep unhoused people on an almost daily basis, if not multiple times a day. How do we speak to these not in my backyard type residents who also make up part of our city?
Yeah, I think Theo is absolutely correct that there is a need for conversations like this in popular education and political education. I I'm not always sure what to do with the NIMBYs, but what I can say is for almost 10 years, I've run a school on venison motor. We have a giving shelf specifically to support unhoused people. And we've done this with 12 to 18-year-olds. No one has ever been hurt. We just have friends, we have neighbors. And that's what it is. I think real community engagement at all levels and really thinking about the person who walks past here is somebody I need to know and figure out what their concerns are on a real level. Like I said, we have a giving shelf, we hang out with people, we do all sorts of things. That's not to say it's some kind of interesting utopia, like there's also concerns and needs and real things that need to happen, but it's possible. So if you are a NIMBY who gets to experience this, I'm really telling you, kids are not the problem here. Kids are empathetic, can participate in community and think about what our problems are. And from working with our specific population, we built out a community garden. We took over road space and public space to do it. We keep just kind of like people come around, they're like, we need this, that, and the other. Community fridge, come and go. Like we do projects and these are kids. So adults need to be super ashamed that they cannot get it together and care about their own communities, number one. I think the second thing is serious solidarity that needs to come between people who are unhoused and this interesting separation between, like, I just happen to have 4 walls. But if it goes south, even for a month, I will be in the predicament of my unhoused neighbor and my friend, because that's who it is. That's the truth of it. And I think we need to like figure out and build better and tighter solidarities around that kind of thing. Unhoused people, and here we're talking about all sorts of unshelteredness, to couch surfing, to precariousness, to all sorts of everything in between, to people paying rent. Someone paying rent should absolutely understand that another human being who sleeps in a tent is closer in their circumstances and what is about to happen to them and the crises that we find ourselves in. That is who you gotta find solidarity with. And we need to figure that out because we don't have it, I think, communally. But I think we can build hyper-locally and locally and whatever. But I think that's a serious place to like really build like tenants unions and ground up our demands of electeds or the powers that be and these establishment people. It has to be like being housed is a human right. And we will not shun or put away our unhoused, unsheltered people who live under bridges or wherever else, just because right now I pay rent somewhere. That is a very temporary thing. And when I think about that 40% of those people are Black like me, I completely understand my situation, understanding I may not be able to pay rent one of these days, which means I got to figure that out. And I hope everyone who gets and understands this program should come together with that understanding.
Thanks so much for that, NDINDI. That was wonderful. And I think it underscores just the power of breaking down myths that are very much untrue, that unhoused people live in constant fear of each other and are constantly prone to the criminal element. Every single large encampment in which I've interviewed people, whether it be in Echo Park, in Santa Ana, in Pomona, in Upland, in Lancaster, every single one of them said that there was power in community and that they look out for each other. And I think even more so than a regular neighborhood where, as you mentioned, people are tenants, they're under the capriciousness of a landlord that might raise the rent a couple $100 on them, and then they're gone and it's just disjointed. There's no community, there's no sense of community because you're constantly moving and fearing landlord rent increases or renovations to your apartment. So in a lot of ways, I've always sensed that the unhoused community has a stronger bond, and we could learn a whole lot about life and community and the power of unity from unhoused residents in the city that we live in. So thank you so much for that. I want to move over to Michelle. Maybe you can tell us about that light at the end of the tunnel. This is it's a horrific and desperate situation for so many people who, for whatever reason, have fallen on tough times, who for whatever reason have sought shelter out on the streets, so to speak. What's next? What's on the horizon with your pulse on the city and your pulse on the advocacy and activist organizations and movements? What's next in this very, very important topic that really needs solutions?
Well, I'm not necessarily your girl for light at the end of the tunnel vibes. So, I want to address a couple things. One will be that, I know we're going to bring this particular panel to a close soon, but I would suggest that we bring these panelists together again to continue the conversation. We didn't even touch on, the bicycle laws that are happening. And, I'd love to lift up some of the other organizations that are doing some of the frontline work and strategy stuff. So, there's all kinds of directions that we could take this conversation. We see you guys commenting in the chat. Thank you. And, we can build on this conversation going forward. I want to offer words of comfort or wisdom or experience, or, it's a struggle because, I'm someone who's been screaming about the problems with capitalism for like 20 years. I come from, in some ways, like I do have an academic background, and, the smartest minds in the room have been talking about the end of capitalism for a long time and what it could look like. And, whether or not we have solutions to take care of people during transition, to take care of people after, to prevent a power vacuum that creates an even more exploitative system, right? I believe that the logical end of capitalism is fascism, right? And I understand, I'm not trying to conflate economics and political structure, but I do believe that that's where it gets us. And exploitation and division are important to capitalism. Its main pillars are, racism and patriarchy. Without these major divisions and all the other isms that come with it, they can't keep us apart. So to Dindi's point, it really is about coming together. It really is about understanding that I'm closer to my neighbor's situation than I am any billionaire. Understanding that, the people that live in tents and the people that live in RVs and the people that live in one-bedroom apartments and the people that spend $10,000 a month on rent but couldn't do that if they lost their job tomorrow, they'd be on the streets in 2 months. So, every single one of us that we come across in our day-to-day life, for the most part, is when the shit hits the fan, so to speak, ain't none of us on the billionaire side of things, right? And perhaps the opposite of light at the end of the tunnel, Ernesto, I'm so sorry, but, I do believe that perhaps we're living in a time of great transition. As a millennial, like, we were the first generation economically to really not be able to do better than our parents, right? We are, what happened to us is the result of, a generation or two of Reaganism and the defunding of our education and our media. And, the idea that we need to be at war all the time, these things have really led to the moment that we're experiencing today. And what the unhoused communities are the first people to fall through the cracks. This is not going to end there. So the only way that we can have some light at the end of the tunnel is to build community and build infrastructures that we can rely upon that are outside of the government systems. That's why I appreciate California Progressive Alliance. That's why I appreciate the mutual aid groups, my organization Solidarity Projects that tries to make connections amongst groups and figure out what groups need in order to fill gaps. Like, we need to be determining what are the actual needs of actual people, and understanding that not only is the unhoused person that I walk past every day my neighbor, and not only could I be there in a, in a catastrophe in my life, I could be there in less than a year or whatever, but also this, in a time of great economic transition, symptoms like this are just the beginning. So please look out for each other. Please, build a community in your community, right? Who's good at stuff? Who struggles with something? Who's the person that hasn't left their apartment in 2 years because they're disabled or for whatever reason? And we need to identify what's happening in our communities and build strong infrastructures, because at the end of the day, like, the city and the government is not coming to get us and save us. I mean, New Orleans comes to mind, the 9th Ward, right? Like, no one's coming. We have to help ourselves and each other. And together we can go much farther, right? This country has trained us to be individuals and libertarians and capitalists, but that doesn't get us very far. Together we can go much farther. So the light at the end of the tunnel for me is perhaps on the other side of a great economic transition that I think is happening right now.
Yeah, a lot of great minds have been moving us away from capitalism, or rather anti-capitalism, right? And NDINDI, if you have any final thoughts about where we go from here, and being in a very tough situation. The real estate forecasts and economists say the housing situation is going to continue to get worse. We're dealing with inflation according to federal statistics and federal officials. Housing is getting worse. It seems like social problems are getting are deepening. Where do we go from here?
Thank you. I don't know. You can never be prescriptive or prophetic or any of those types of things. I think I appreciate what both Michelle and Theo are saying. This idea that we need to kind of really establish solidarities or reestablish new ones or figure that out. And also I think a little bit need to be more courageous in the type of actions that we take. So I have to imagine that the folks who will be interested in this are interested in a variety of tactics. So there's the local kind of electoral way that you can go, but there's protests, we email, we do the die-in, we sleep it, we do it all. And I think we're going to, as time goes, really need to open up when it comes to tactics. Power is not just gonna just give it up. Establishment won't just give up on us. So I think we really press City Hall. We really, you cannot have your job if you continue to dehumanize us. That has to be a serious demand and a showing up that we do, and we mobilize towards those types of things. And then also, because I come from that mutual aid, part of it is, I remember I was there at Occupy. I remember, the first wave of Black Lives Matter. I remember, 2016, where people were very concerned about the rise of Trumpism. We remember 2020. So I've been around for a long time. And in these kind of 20 plus years, sometimes we burn out, we lose energy. We have to take care of each other so we don't kind of burn out or lose our way. I think that's part of it as well, as we learn our new tactics, because, if you're someone who had energy in 2020 and now you're not doing something anymore, I'm always wondering what happened? Why is that not the case? How can we get you back? And I get it, capitalism is totalizing. People went back to work is what it is, right? And people got sick and people died and people got disabled. That's what the pandemic did. And we cannot minimize the kind of trauma that we have collectively been through. And it's been rough. And it's been rough if you've been organizing. It's been rough if you've been just at home. It's been rough all around. So we also, I think we need to take time and be honest about that and love each other and do all of that warm stuff and that too. Because there's a lot that has to be done, and we can't lose energy. I mean, it's our lives, right? So we have to do it.
Somebody said we're not doing boomer activism anymore. We don't ask people to check their problems at the door. We're addressing people where they're at. You know, it's like boomer activism was like, leave your problems at the door and show up ready to work. No, you're a whole entire human. We're going to take care of each other through this.
That is so timely. And for example, where people believe that you keep your skeletons in your closet, or you can't give food and do cop watch, or all of these old anachronistic ideas, they must understand times have changed. And as a martial artist myself, you always have to adapt to the times or evolve or die. You know, you can't live off the fumes of yesteryear, of the glory things that you may have done in the 60s and 70s, or this other part of life that you think is going to be effective. The enemy is evolving, we must evolve into, but we can't evolve into the point where we shut down our youth, our future generations in doing activism on online and social media as well.
So much, Theo, for those last comments. And with that, we're going to wrap up this panel on the latest frightening ban on homelessness, which essentially creates yet another layer of criminalization of our brothers and sisters that are living unhoused without shelters on the streets. Thank you so much to everyone for being a part of this panel. Michelle Manos, the chair of the of CPA, the California Progressive Alliance, NDINDI, KITONGA, and of course Theo. Thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of this.
Yes, and thank you, Ernesto. Ernesto, I just want to say, like always, a professional and extraordinary moderator, also a member of the CPA Steering Committee board. And so I want to thank also our guests, Dindi and Theo. Please follow PUMA's Unhoused Mutual Aid and We the Unhoused on social medias. And if I had to guess, I'd say we'll probably come together again and talk about more about this issue. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.